This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And this is another installment of our occasional series called On Second Thought, where I invite my friends onto the show and force them to reread books that they didn't like reading the first time. It's not really about that. It's mostly a joke, but also it's an opportunity to talk honestly about the Star Wars books we love, maybe don't love, why that is, and why it's okay sometimes to not connect with a book. Today I'm talking to Brandon from Clashing Sabers. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that I got him on this episode to talk about a book he didn't love reading the first time, or really the second time that he read it. We're talking about Ronin. We both reread the book for this episode, and I highly encourage you to listen to the conversation whether you loved the book yourself or not. Enjoy! Cool. Awesome. Recording is good. We don't ever want to forget that. I never have. I've just had technology decide not to record when I asked it to, which is a whole other thing. It's fine.
You want a fun story?
Yes.
Early in the Clashing Sabers pantheon, I had a Zoom recorder that I was feeding into, and it was great, except it took a lot of batteries. It took 4 AA batteries, and they didn't last very long.
Oh no.
It was just Drew and myself, I think, and we had 2 people on doing our top 3, bottom 3 for the Phantom Menace, for like, I think it was for the 20th anniversary of it or something, because we're at 25 now. We get halfway through the recording and I realized the Zoom recorder died about 45 minutes ago.
No.
And mind you, I'm new at this, so I have no other way of recording. Like, I don't know what else to do. So I had to like tuck my tail between my legs and be like, guys, should we start over? Like, I feel like a total jerk. So long story short, we ended up going, hey, you know what? We're celebrating the Phantom Menace. Let's just do the best things. Because we had just gotten through all of like the bottom 3. And we're like, let's just do an episode of the best things. So from that point on, I learned in that Zoom recorder, you replace those 4 AA batteries, whether they're dead or not, you replace them every recording. But oh my God, the level of embarrassment that I had here I am feeling like I have this professional setup. My buddy who was in doing audio editing and stuff helped me. He bought me this recorder. I felt so good about myself. And first time we have like other podcast guests on, and my freaking technology dies. It was terrible.
The first like major Star Wars interview I did, I don't know how many times I've told this story, probably not very many because it's embarrassing, was at Star Wars Celebration 22, and I was interviewing the original 5 High Republic authors. Best day of my life for many reasons. We did this interview.
I'm gonna let Devore know that was the best day of your life. Just so you know, that's definitely going in the text chat later.
I mean, we also got married that day, so like.
Okay, that's valid.
It really was a great day until we were this interview, I think, because it was like a press thing. So like I got, I think, like 10, maybe 12 minutes. And it was like a really great interview. Like I thought it was great. Finished, was walking out. The publicist comes up to me. She's like, that was the best interview I've seen all day. Great. I think my phone may have recorded 45 seconds of it. And that's it. Nothing else. I
No.
lost the entire thing. And to this day, it just never saw the light of day because I ended up emailing her back and I was like, hey, listen, this is the worst, but I didn't get the recording. And like we tried to coordinate to see if anyone could like it didn't work because like you're in person one time.
Yeah.
So that was like, oh, that was I still think about that and I'm like, that was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. It was fine. Overall the day was as good as it could have been, but
Yeah. I had a time that I forgot mountain time existed.
oh no.
So I was interviewing just for the sake of not uh throwing her under the bus. I won't mention who I was interviewing, but I got on at what I thought was the correct time
Oh
because I
no.
had calculated Pacific time versus Central time, and it was an hour late, and they were not there. And I was like, well, that's kind of crappy. They just kind of like ditched the interview, and I go check my email, and it's like, where were you? So I had again to tuck my tail between my legs and be like, I forgot mountain time was a thing that exists. And can we reschedule this? And let's just say you could feel the tension being cut with the knife because like I'm over here going like, yeah, this is all my fault. And I apologize profusely. And this
Mm,
person was not accepting this apology very well.
no. Oh no.
So yeah, that's the adventures of podcasting and content
Yeah.
creation is like you have to just roll with the punches. And
Hmm.
sometimes, like I'm teaching journalism this year, and I just had to tell my kids like, hey, sometimes your stuff's gonna suck. Like
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, your stuff's just gonna suck.
Yeah.
But it's those ones that work out really well that keep you going. And
Exactly.
now I guess we ended up here where we are today, recording this episode because of all those things that happened.
All the bad things that happened to get us here.
I know, right? We're trauma bonded. We didn't even know it, but we are.
Need some weekly joint therapy to just get us.
I'll tell Devore that you and I are going to couples therapy from now on. Well, I'm sure he'll be cool with it.
This is already the best episode I've ever recorded. It's fine. He keeps telling me he's like, I'm so excited to listen to this episode in like 5 minutes, and I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah, let's just not tell him anything and just wait for the texts to come through when he actually listens to this episode. Love you, Devore.
Oh, I cannot wait. I cannot wait. So I'll give a little backstory on why we're here, and then I'll let you talk about yourself for a little while.
Oh God, you don't want to do that, but okay.
Well, just in case anyone listening doesn't know who you are. So this is a series we're calling On Second Thought, and what this series is really about is the value of rereading books and revisiting Star Wars stories. The origin of this was infamously, I read a book called Heir to the Jedi and hated it so much that I gave it like the worst possible review I could have, which I don't do that anymore. But like back then, I was like, I'm going to rip this book apart because I did not like it. And so it was 4 years after that, I was like, you know what would be interesting is if I revisited that book at a different time in my life. And I reread this book and I didn't, love it. Like it wasn't like a 5-star for me, but I significantly liked it a lot more than I had the first time. And I changed my star rating. I wrote another review and I started thinking to myself, I'm like, why did I not dislike it so much? And I thought back to that point in my life and I realized like, oh, that was a terrible time for me. Like personally, just everything was going wrong. And I was reading this book and it like affected the way that I perceived the story and how it was written and what it meant. And I got the story, but I didn't really pay attention because I think, just dealing with other things. And I thought, like, how many times do you read a book in which the situation that you're currently in your real life is impacting how you enjoy it or how you don't or how you think about it? So I thought it would be really interesting to revisit that. And I did. And I did a whole episode about it. And I'll link it in the show notes description thing. But I thought to myself, what if I did this, but instead of it just being me, I invited other people on, forced them to reread books they said they didn't like, and then have a conversation to see not necessarily if their thoughts I'm so excited for this. Not expecting that their whole worldview on the book changes, but as a way of kind of revisiting stories, thinking about why they do or don't work for us, and kind of being able to say, hey, like, you don't have to love every Star Wars book. It's fine. So I did this with your co-hosts, Drew and Devore, with the Aftermath trilogy, because both of them had very mixed feelings about it. And I loved it. So we all reread those books and we talked about them. Um, and no one's mind was really changed, but it was a very fun conversation. But in that conversation, I jokingly said, hey, I know I know Brandon hates Ronin. What if I got him onto the show to talk about it? Um, and they were like, you're never gonna do that. It's not possible. And I said, I'm very persuasive. I think I can make it happen. And it turns out it didn't really take that much persuading. So that was fun. So here we are.
Yeah, I am a glutton for punishment.
I was like, I'm never going to get him to say yes. And it took like bringing it up one time, and you're like, sure, why not?
It was really the shaming that I got from Drew, who
No.
was like, I reread 3 books for this, and you can't reread one. And I was like, I'm working on this whole people pleaser aspect of myself and trying not to make that, So yeah, so here we are rereading what is, spoiler alert, my least favorite book of all time, and the one book that I would be in agreement should be on a banned book list. Let's just put it that way.
We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into all of can't believe this.
I want you to remember, as we go through this conversation, you wanted me on your show.
I did.
I did not offer this. You brought this upon yourself.
Before we actually talk about Ronin, which I also reread for this episode, for the record, I just finished it this morning.
I'm so sorry.
We'll talk about that. Why don't you don't have to say a lot, but tell me about you. Tell me about Star Wars and what it means to you, and how it kind of led you to um want to start a podcast about it and want to talk to other people about books and things. Tell me, why are you here?
Why am I here? That is a question I ask
why
myself
are any
regularly.
Of us here?
I mean, I have pretty much always been a Star Wars fan. I was born, right at the right age for the prequels coming out. Was even a huge Star Wars fan before that. I infamously faked being sick to stay home, and I would watch Sports Center till I had it memorized, and then I would watch Return of the Jedi the rest of the day. So that kind of shows you the 2 sides of my personality. And it's always been there, and I don't know why. I don't really know what got me started into it, because nobody in my family gives a rat's behind about Star Wars. And so it was just something that always connected with me on a real level. And in retrospect, I would learn, as an adult, that I am on the spectrum and that I have ADHD and things that make it hard for me to comprehend the world. Yeah. And Star Wars was my means of doing that. And so it always stuck with me. And then, you become, well, you don't know, but you become a teenage boy, and the sports and the girls become a lot cooler than the Star Wars does. So I fell out of it for a while. I never disliked it, but ironically enough, I was very anti-Star Wars going into animation. And that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was like, I'm kind of done with Star Wars, more or less. And so I go about my life, and then I'm at a really vulnerable point in my life when I find out that Disney bought Star Wars and they're making new movies. And hey, I've been reconnecting with aspects of my inner child, so let's give this Star Wars thing a try again. And it actually started with looking at Star Wars art on Pinterest. Was what got me back into it. And then I was like, listening to podcasts, and I won't name those podcasts because those are podcasts we don't listen to anymore. But I was young and dumb and didn't know these things. And so I kept hearing everybody talking about this Clone Wars show. And I was like, you know what? Like, what the hell? Let's give it a try and we'll see if we like it. And now I infamously say Star Wars is animation is my Star Wars. I have multiple Ahsoka tattoos, and I am working on the concept of a whole sleeve of Ahsoka. I have a Darth Maul tattoo because of Clone Wars. Yeah, it just became a huge aspect of my life. Rebels after that completely revolutionized my entire existence. Like, animation became huge for me. Ahsoka is not only my favorite character, but possibly part of the reason that I'm still alive today, because I was in a very dark place when I found Clone Wars and when I found Ahsoka, and her story really has traveled with me. So all of that kind of led to not actually wanting to start a podcast. Initially, I started Clashing Sabers .net as just a website where we were going to do meta-analysis articles and things like that. And then I found myself constantly talking to the aforementioned unnamed podcasts and going like, saying different things and thinking different things and wanting to write these articles, but going, man, people would have to have the context of the podcast to really understand what I'm saying. And I was like, well, why don't I do that? Why don't I just start podcasting and give them the context that they need? That's not that interesting in writing, but if I'm doing it in a podcast and communicating with somebody else, it'll be different, and we'll be able to bounce ideas off of it. And I always had this vision of a space where, and this is why it's called Clashing Sabers and not Cotton Candy Sabers, we jokingly say, where people of different perspectives came together and had discussions and debates and disagreements and walked away as friends. That was always the mission. And it was kind of like things have moved in that direction a great bit. There's a lot more shows that are out there that are doing that, but we were kind of at the beginning of that movement, which is pretty cool. Like, I'm not saying we're the reason it happened or anything like that. I think it was a natural progression, but it's cool to know that like back then we were recognizing things like that. And so it became a bigger and bigger thing. And I brought in, Drew and Mark and Lindsay were kind of the core that helped me really start the version of what it is today. And then we brought in, more people. We've got, Zach and Amanda and Adriana and of course Devore all on there now. And everybody just bringing these radically different perspectives. And so we expanded to having different shows, one of them being the book podcast, Don't Burn the Sacred Text, where Lindsay and I talk about the new canon books. And we have a little bit of a different approach to it because we rate the books at the beginning before we talk about them. We have our discussion, we re-rate them at the end, which is always fun because you see how those conversations can change things. And that kind of, to me, is the epitome of what we do is, like, let's have a conversation and not go in it trying to change somebody's opinion, but go in it presenting ours and seeing how it affects people. And so we've been able to do some really cool stuff. We've been able to start a nonprofit that's put Star Wars books into classrooms across the country, which is kind of my favorite thing that we've done, which is really cool. And let me tell you what, it's a lot of fun to go spend other people's money on books. I just went and spent last weekend or the weekend before, I was in Dallas, hanging out with my aunt and uncle who live there, and they have the headquarters of Half Price Books there. And they're like, you got to go check this place out. Man. And I was like, we have money in the account. So I spent $700 on Star Wars books. God. It was a thing. It was great. And so I've got those sitting there that are going to go out to people. And I'm sure we can, talk more about how people can do that at the end. But yeah, it's been a great experience. And it all comes back to kind of, doing what we're doing today, which is taking something that we love and looking at it from different perspectives and trying to see why people think the way that they do. And I've spent many a years trying to figure out how the heck Drew likes Ronin, but that's kind of the short version of kind of how I got here, even though it was very long-winded.
I think it's always very interesting to ask Star Wars podcasters why they started podcasting, because not everyone's answer is the same, but a lot of us just, we might have listened to other podcasts and weren't hearing what we wanted to hear or weren't finding a show that we really vibed with, to the point where we were like, do we have to do this ourselves? And not that those other podcasts are, not that all of them are bad or inferior, but I think there's power in wanting to create something in your own style and your own voice that adds to the conversation.
Mhm.
I think it's really, really interesting. And I know there are like a million Star Wars podcasts, and some come and go, and it's, some grow really big and then they kind of disappear. But I think like, um, in the case of Clashing Sabers and now this show, having an ongoing conversation that really focuses on just things that you like and conversations that you want to have and getting these different perspectives, I think there's longevity in that. And I like it a lot.
Yeah, and when I started, I very much was like, I want to be one of the big time
Mm-hmm.
podcasters.
Yeah.
I want to go to the premieres. I want to do all of these. I want to get these interviews and stuff like that. And if you offered me all of that, but said I had to give up what Clashing Sabers is now,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't make that trade.
Yeah.
Not, it wouldn't even go under consideration. Now, if you said I could do all those things and keep Clashing Sabers and the whole team and everything like that, but yeah, it did start from like a place of I'm not seeing what I want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And there it's everything at the time that I was aware of, and I look back now and there were things that, I'm kind of glad I didn't discover. Like one of the shows I'm glad I didn't discover till later was Wampa's Lair. I love the Wampa's
Mm-hmm.
Lair. Great shows.
Mm-hmm.
But they do a lot of what I was feeling like we didn't have, and a lot of what Classic Sabers does now. And um, if I had found them earlier, I probably would have been like, okay, cool, it's out there. Like I don't need to do it. But you're right. It is kind of like it's like a Thanos situation. It's like, okay, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of ego in that.
Yeah.
But I also think there was a lot of me that was just wanting for connection,
Yeah.
that I didn't have, and
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars had been a means when I was a kid to help me connect with people. And I looked back on it. I was in this point when I was very much looking back on my life and trying to find the narrative and everything. And I looked back and I was like, man, my life was always better when Star Wars was around. And my life got worse when Star Wars wasn't around.
Mm-hmm.
And now as an adult, you go through your trials and tribulations, and my life has gotten pretty dark at some points over the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And but Star Wars always being there was one thing that kept me going. And the Clashing Sabers team that we have now was there through it all, and it's kind of crazy that we connected over this space fantasy. And now, I have a second family. And it's those things that keep me going as a podcaster. It's like, it's not even the podcast itself that at this point I find that interesting. It's the journey of it, the creation of it, the conversations that you get to have. Like if 5 people listen to it, great. If 5,000 people listen to it, even better.
Yeah.
But you show up because of what podcasting ends up bringing to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's, it's all about like sticking to what you want it to be. And I think, I look at my numbers sometimes just because I'm curious, not because I really care that much. And I'm like, I could get so many more downloads if I did this, this, and this, but it's like, but it wouldn't be the show wouldn't be what it is and what I want it to be. And it's the people who tell me like, I love the way that your show is because you don't do this or this like other shows do. And having a small audience that feels that way is so much better, in my opinion, than having a huge audience who, is there just because you use clickbait or your thumbnails, or I don't know what people are doing, but I'm all for a small audience who just is there because they really vibe with what you're doing.
And our small audience has helped us raise almost $10,000 to get books into classrooms. So there's a power there. There's definitely a power there.
There is. I'll definitely link to more info about that nonprofit. Because ever since I found out that that's something that you do, I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. I love it. And we'll talk more about that when we close out, because it's important. So we're here for a very specific reason. We've talked about it a little bit, but I think as long as we've been able to avoid it for the last 25 minutes. All right. So This series is all about rereading Star Wars books, regardless of what you might have felt when you first read it. We're going to give it a second try and we're going to see how we feel. We both have come to this episode having reread the book. I'm sorry that I made you do that. And we're gonna
Apology not accepted, but here we are anyway.
We're gonna talk about it. We probably won't get like into like super detailed. Like we'll see how it goes. It really just depends on what we want to touch on. Um, but I will say, um, one of the reasons that I wanted to do Ronin for our next episode, the main one was I knew that you hated it, and I wanted to do everything in my power to get you on the episode to talk about it, and I've accomplished that. So that was one. But the other
Well
was
done.
I did it. I did it. I am
Gold
as
star.
persuasive as I think I am.
Or I'm as weak as I try to pretend I'm not.
Why
but,
not both?
Whatever. Yeah, there you go. That's better.
So when I first read Ronin, right before it came out, I had an advanced copy of it, and I was like, I need to read this book now because I need to review it. Because context for what was going on in my life at that point, because this would have been September, October 2021, because it came out October 12th that year. I was in a long distance relationship. That aspect of it being long distance was terrible. We had just decided I'm going to move across the country to be with this person, which is great. Worked out pretty well in both of our favors, I think. But I had a month to pack up everything I could take with me to go, while also doing everything else. I ended up also changing jobs right around that time. I had all these interviews I had to do because I was podcasting like 6 times a week because I needed that for stability, and I needed people to talk to because I was losing my mind. It was a great time in my life, but also terrible. But also I had to read this book to review it before I left. So I had to rush through it, and I had to write this review, and I had to figure out how am I going to do all these things. But I was reading this book and I'm like, is it just me or do I not understand anything that's happening in this book? Because I'm reading it, I'm skimming some parts of it. I'm speed reading. I'm trying to get through it so that I can write a mostly positive yet honest review as quickly as possible. And I'm getting closer and closer to the end of this book, and I'm like, I still don't really understand what's happening. It must just be because I'm reading it so fast. When I finished it, for the record, I didn't hate it. I kind of liked it. And I'll talk about why I kind of liked it and why I still kind of like certain aspects of it, certain things about it. But it bothered me that I had no idea what was happening in this book. But I thought it was just me. And I thought it was just, like the fact that I was reading it so fast. So a couple days ago, I was like, I need to, obviously, start rereading this book for this episode to get my thoughts together. And I tried the audiobook this time. I'll tell you what, I still have no idea what happens in most of this book. Now, for me, that doesn't mean I dislike it. There are certain authors and certain writing styles and certain styles of storytelling that I just don't vibe with. And I think I'm gathering this is definitely one of those for me. I've read a few of this author's other books, and it's kind of the same thing. I'm realizing it's this author specifically for me. Amazing writing, amazing world building, very good at a lot of things. It's just not for me. And I almost feel bad about that. But also, that's kind of where I'm at with it. Yeah. You can kind of tell me why don't you tell me how you felt after the first time that you read it? And maybe this time too. I don't know. We're just going. We're gonna see how this goes.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned you didn't know what was going on, because I got about my first time through, I think I got about 180 pages through. And I stopped and said, I have no idea what's happening in this book. And I wasn't skimming. I was reading. Here's how I kind of judge how much I like a book, because a lot of times I read before I go to sleep. If I fall asleep easily, I don't like the book that much. And I was falling asleep after like a page and a half.
No.
So this is taking me, I'm at like month 3 by the time I get to 150. I started the book over. I was like, I clearly the fault is my own because this has never happened to me before.
Yeah.
In the long run, it took me 8 months to read this
Oh
book.
my God.
Now, I'm not a fast reader, but I ain't that slow. And I got to the end, and mind you, I had come into this with Drew having read. We get the digital version earlier than we get our releases for the early copies.
Yeah.
So he had already finished it. I think he might have read it twice by the
Oh my
time
God.
that I got to finishing it. And he had been talking about how great this book is. And I mean, Drew and I disagree on a lot of things. But never to the extent that we did with Ronin. So I didn't expect to dislike it as much as I did. But I legitimately hate this book. And not to the extent that I spend a lot of time, lambasting it, say for when it's a convenient dig at Drew, because that's just what we do. But yeah, it was really bad. I think I gave it a 0-star review on Don't Burn the Sacred Text. I remember, like, I don't know. Lindsay's my normal co-host. I don't know if she even finished the book, to be totally honest with you, because she wasn't on that episode. It was Drew, myself, and I think it was the first time we had Amanda on one of our shows. And we were worried that, it's just going to be Amanda and I teaming up against Drew about how terrible this book is. He actually defended himself quite well, but not to the extent to get me to go like, yeah, this book has something going for it. So then this reread, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to dislike this book. There is nothing that can happen for it to redeem itself for me, because the story is not going to change. The writing style is not going to change.
Yeah.
None of that is going to change. So I'm going to just try to find any positive that I can and latch on to that. I was very unsuccessful in doing so. But I did have a realization about what, besides the fact that there are no interesting characters and the plot is convoluted at best. I think the biggest issue with this book is it's a sequel without the prequel. And the more interesting story is the prequel.
Yeah.
The more interesting story is the one about the Jedi and Sith war that really built the world that we find ourselves in Ronin.
Right.
The more interesting story is how they make a whole planet disappear. We're 40 years late to this party. And these characters all have this trauma that we have no experience with, so we have no way of connecting with them with. And that's a huge issue. It makes the characters very uninteresting. And I think a big mistake was made. And please, audience, listen to me all the way through, because I promise I'm going somewhere and I'm not being a complete bigot or jerk. I think a huge mistake was made by making the Traveler non-binary. And the reason that I think that's true is this character is so ambiguous overall that not having a gender designation made it harder to connect with that character. If you had made the Ronin they them, or one of the other characters who is more of a grounded real life kind of person, I think that would have allowed for a better connection with the Traveler. And not having a connection with the Traveler and having said individual have these many different faces made it hard. There was nothing to grasp onto that was understandable for someone like myself. Like I love, I think Emma Camden, they tried to self-insert with the Traveler there a little bit. And I have no problem with that. And I love having non-binary characters in the stories. I think the representation, all of that stuff is critically important. I am at the forefront of doing whatever I can to help make sure that is something that people recognize. But if you're going to have an ambiguous character, and I mean ambiguous in the sense of there's no real identity to this person. They go by multiple different names. Everybody has different perspectives on them, not the non-binary part. But if you're going to have this ambiguous character, you have to give some place where you can ground them in something that your everyday person understands. And I think if you had made it that character more grounded in reality, the story goes very differently, because then it's like, okay, I can relate to this person, and there's nothing to relate to with the traveler, and not having a gender designation, for lack of a better term, made it harder to understand that. Does that make
Mhm.
any sense?
It does make sense. It does, and
Okay.
I think it's a fair point. Um,
Like I want to be invested in that character.
right.
I mean, I do. Like, I'm not really interested in the Ronin that much. That I don't really care about that character. But the Traveler is one of those characters where, like, I should be able to connect with them, but
Yeah.
you you can't form a clear picture of who they are, and then they have this mask on the whole time, and it's like, okay, I get it, the mask is a metaphor, but give me something. And I
Yeah.
think there's been a lot of authors who have, like, I don't like Last Shot that much, not nearly to the extent that I don't like Ronin,
Hmm.
but Last Shot, just Daniel Jose Older is just, one of those writers that's not for me, like you mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. Like, I clash with his style.
Yeah.
But he has a non-binary character in Last Shot that has a personality and has character to them that you can grasp onto, and it's like, okay, cool. They built Daniel Jose Older built a character that is grounded in reality, and they just happen to be a they them.
Hmm.
Whereas here, I think, like, they were trying to make Emma Camden, they were trying to make that their whole personality,
Hmm.
and make them all ambiguous, and that, like, not having that in what really is, I mean, he's no, they sorry are kind of your antagonist. I mean, the
Hmm.
Traveler is kind of the antagonist in this whole thing,
Right.
and you need something grounded in what people understand to make you root for the Ronin to overcome those challenges that are presented, and it's just not anything.
Hmm. I think if you're a reader who really needs that connection with the main players in a story, if you need to really feel like you understand where they're at and where they're coming from and where they're going as much as you can, if you need to be able to relate to them in some way in order to care about them, and you're not being given that what you need, it makes sense to kind of be like, I need more than that.
Yeah, give me something
Yeah,
specific, you know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, I honestly, I think this story would have worked really well if the Ronin had been non-binary, because I think that that
Mm,
makes it more of an aspect where you as the reader can self-insert. Like, another problem I had is the Ronin's just not anybody that I can relate to as a protagonist, and they don't really protag a lot,
hmm.
and so I don't feel invested in that character. If you give me a character there that is, somebody that, what Emma Camden was trying to do with the Traveler was paint this very ambiguous character, so people could insert into there, and instead
Mm,
they made them very distant. If you had done that with your protagonist, I think you've got
mm.
a completely different story. I don't know if it's a good
Right.
story, but it's definitely completely different.
Right. This book was the premise of it and everything was so interesting before it came out, in particular because it was a book based on one of the Vision shorts. And I loved Visions. I think just the variety of storytelling and the different perspectives, I think just is a good premise within itself. And to be able to do an entire book based on one of those, I think was a really interesting thing that they wanted to try and they did. Even more interesting that it's this like alternate history, almost alternate universe where it's it's Star Wars, but it's not. Um I think one of the things I struggled with this book in that aspect is it feels a lot, if you like dig into it too much, it feels a lot like it could have been any story kind of with Star Wars just like painted on top of it. Um and that's not the case with like everything. Like there are some details that like it's Star Wars and it fits. But I don't love that in Star Wars books, and this isn't the only one that has that problem. There are some books where it could very easily have not been Star Wars, but they'd like put Star Wars names and Star Wars things in it, and so it's Star
Mm-hmm.
Wars. And I struggled with that a little bit, not so much in the second read, but definitely the first one. I was like, it doesn't feel, I think the what I struggled with is it doesn't feel like what I'm used to in Star Wars because it's Japanese inspired. It's very, if you read the author's other books, it's very much like those, set in their style and the kind of inspirations that they have. And again, it's just, I think I just wasn't used to that. And it kind of tripped me up a little bit.
Well, I
Because
don't think they give you an opportunity to get used to it. That's part of
yeah,
the problem.
right,
Is you jump in and you're supposed to already know that the Jedi are not the Jedi that we're used to. The Sith are
right,
not the Sith that we're used to. The Empire
right.
are the good guys now.
Yeah,
It's all like they're again. It goes back to that idea of giving the audience something to be grounded in. And when we
right.
read Star Wars books on the regular, we're grounded in. Okay, I know how this galaxy that works very differently from our own. I
Mm,
know how it works.
yeah,
So you can have other books that are a sequel to something that didn't have a prequel. You could jump
yeah,
into a High Republic book and be like, okay, cool. I might not know everything that's happened, before this, but I have the grounding to be able to understand this
right.
story. And Emma Camden, they changed the definition of everything. Like
Yeah,
they even changed the definition of the force with this black current and white current. And
yeah.
then the black current is the light side, but the white current is the dark side, but not really because they switch back and forth and all of that stuff. Like it's just like that's honestly I think is my biggest issue is just a lack of grounding that you get in the plot, in the world building,
Yeah.
in the characters. Like there is nothing to grasp onto in this story.
Yeah. And I do agree with what you said before about how like we kind of needed more of the past, more of that like prequel aspect of like there's some really interesting things that happened that we would love to have more context for that we just don't have context for. And this is kind of the way that this author does their storytelling. Well, they don't give you the context. They kind of just start the world building and kind of like shove you into it and like you kind of have to figure it out as you go. And like I so I don't think I can do that to this
Mm-hmm.
extent. I think that is their thing and they do it very well. If that's your style of if that's the kind of thing you want to read, if you just want to be like thrust into this new universe, which I mean, we do that all the time with fantasy and sci-fi and things like that, but like this is like a whole other level that I think I just am not equipped for. And I don't really know if there is something to be done about that. It might just be that it's just, again, not for me. And that's really hard for me to say because, um, uh, again, I don't dislike this book. It's just very, I think it's challenging. And I think there's part of me that is not used to being challenged by Star Wars books. And it's like, shouldn't I be reading a Star Wars book because it's like fun and like interesting and like, no, we're going to challenge you and make you like try to figure it out. And maybe I just don't like that. I don't
Well,
know.
you're trying to build a puzzle without the box,
Yeah, yeah, there's that.
and I think I'm making a lot of presumptions here, but the effect of A New Hope has been very broad and wide, and I would presume that Emma Camden looked at A New Hope and they said George built this world by just thrusting people into it
Mm,
because I think we as a society have overstated how much that actually happened. We look at things like you fought with my father in the Clone Wars, and we think, oh my God, he built this whole world. And there was this Clone Wars history and everything. No, it was just there was a war.
mm,
That's it. That's
yeah,
all that built.
right.
Like, okay, cool. We are in the aftermath of a war. We, as a 1977 post World War II world, can comprehend that. We, as a prequels era culture, can understand being on the brink of war because we were when those movies were coming out on the brink of
Mm,
war,
mhm,
and we can go back and look at them through that lens, right? So we had the grounding in society of what was going on this very simple term. We look back at it now, we go, oh man, the Clone Wars is such a big thing. It wasn't a big deal.
yeah.
His dad died in a war. That was it. That was the whole point of it. It didn't go beyond that, right?
Mm,
And that's the point that people always go to talk about how George built this world. And George did build this world, but a lot of it was just one, either luck that he fell into, or two, very small moments that we as a culture have blown out of proportion because of what Star Wars has become.
mhm,
Emma Camden, I think they tried to do that, and I respect the effort,
mhm,
but I think it was another failure in it because they made the things like the Clone Wars or like the planet of Rezu disappearing. I think that's how you say it. It's pivotal to the story rather than being an ancillary thing. right?
Yeah.
Like the Clone Wars doesn't affect anything that happens in A New Hope. It just gives a little bit of background information on why Luke's dad isn't around.
Mm-hmm.
The disappearance of Rezu is the crux of everything that has happened in this version of the galaxy. We need to see that. It's just like if you do the I am your father, like you have to show a resolution to that, right?
Right.
And you have to go back and give that story if you're going to drop that bombshell. And I think George, to some extent, always intended to do that. I don't think he had the prequels all planned out or anything like that. That's ridiculous. But I do think he did that. I'm the father going, I can go back and tell more stories earlier than this. And I don't have to continue on with, these actors who are going to grow older and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
You picked up this story, 30, 40 years after the I am your father moment, and nothing has happened to resolve that I am your father moment. That's where this story is at. Mm-hmm. So imagine sitting with The Empire Strikes Back from 1981, right? When it came out, 1980 to 2022 or 2020. Actually, that even works even better, because imagine you have COVID hit, and that's when you find out the answer to the I am your father. And you're supposed to deal with all of the stuff around the world with COVID and also resolve these issues of this past. But the people who are living now that are dealing with the problem weren't really around back then to be the ones who are creating the problem. Like, does that make sense? Like it's so convoluted to leave this issue sitting out there and never resolve it, but then also never go back and actually tell imagine Star Wars without the original trilogy.
Yeah.
That's what you've got here. You've got the sequels without the original trilogy. You've got Luke turning around at the end of Force Awakens and nobody knows who Luke Skywalker is. Right. That's what this book is. And that's a huge, huge failure on the part of Emma Camden. And I don't think they're a bad person. I don't think they came in to ruin Star Wars. They didn't ruin Star Wars for me. I just like a Star Wars. Like, you want to get into one that I really feel like had the potential to do that, we can do another episode about the Acolyte. I've gone on my rants there. This is a small drop in a very large bucket. So I don't want it to seem like this, I'm anti-Star Wars because of this book. But I do think the failure of this book is so complete that it needs to be noticed and recognized so that it doesn't happen again. And I don't mean that by saying I don't want Emma Camden back and they're a bad person or anything of that nature. Yeah. I'd actually like to see them write another book.
Yeah.
I honestly would, because at the same time that I make this argument, and I'll finish my rant on this note, I have said for years and continue to hold, I don't like Daniel Jose Older's writing style. And I also will fight for him to be in Star Wars for as long as possible.
Right. Because
I think that we need those different kinds of storytellers, and it has to be okay that within reason, as long as it doesn't violate the real truth and sanctity of the story, which Daniel Jose Older has never done. He's just told the stories in a different style. Those individuals should be present in our storytelling. Yeah. So I would fight for Emma Camden. I would fight for them to write another book. A much lower stakes one, for sure. I don't want them writing, Luke's Jedi Academy trilogy, but do I want to give them a second shot? Absolutely. I wouldn't have picked up this book again if I didn't want that. And so, I don't even remember what the original question we were talking about is, because when I get like this, I just get so excited to talk about it. But I do think the failure of this book is extremely strong, and I've seen it across platforms. I've seen it across conversations with people, that I do really think it's something important to take note of in building the future of Star Wars.
Well, they haven't done another one of these. They've done some comics that are Visions related, but they haven't tried another, let's take a Vision story and make a whole novel out of it. And that could, I don't know anything about this behind the scenes, but it's very possible that could be because this was something they wanted to try, because why not try things? Especially in 2021, when you've just started the High Republic, you're doing publishing is exploding, doing all these different things. Why not try something new? And it's very possible that they said, let's try taking a Vision story that's not very fleshed out, because it's just this short film type thing, and let's build it out into a book. And they tried it, and maybe it didn't work. And maybe there are a lot of reasons it didn't work for a lot of people or for some people. And that's just something that happens sometimes, I think. And I think that's
I
okay.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like um there have been a lot of Star Wars books. We know this. There have been a lot of Star Wars books written by a lot of different people about a lot of different things. And I think Star Wars is at its best when it is trying to do things different. That doesn't always mean it's going to stick the landing. And I really think that needs to be okay. I really think like even with things like Ronin, where it did not vibe with I think a percentage of people, I don't know how many, it didn't vibe.
Everybody except Drew. I've legitimately never heard of anybody like it except Drew. But
it didn't vibe with a lot of people, but like they tried it. It's out there. I think it's a really cool concept. And I really do think that the writing itself is amazing. Does it make like is it a story that I can follow easily or that I want to revisit again and again? Not necessarily, but I think if you really get into like the metaphors and the wordplay, just like that aspect of it, like it's really, really good. And I think I tell people to read this book because I think there's a possibility that you might like it. Even if I don't know you and I don't know the kinds of books you like. So if there's a possibility that you might fall in love with this book, I'm going to say go read it. And if you don't like it, I just told you to go read it. I didn't tell you whether or not you were going to like it, you know? So
yeah. Oh, and I definitely wouldn't go that route because I feel like part of that conversation that somebody would be asking you is like, I want you to give me a book that shows the epitome of what a Star Wars book is. And this is like the antithesis of it. And you almost need to not know any Star Wars to get this book. But it's also not going to be like I just call it space. This isn't a Star Wars book. It's a book with Star Wars vernacular use.
Yeah.
And I would be okay with that if it wasn't masquerading as a Star Wars book. That would be the thing. Like there's plenty of books out there and there's plenty of movies out there that are trying to be Star Wars and failed to do so. And it's like, all right, cool, whatever. Like Star Wars has had a huge cultural impact. Now, if somebody was asking like, hey, I want you to share with me like the wildest book that's out there or what's like the craziest thing that I could read, then Ronin, right? Yeah. Because it's way out there and it tries things. And I think the book that this is closest to, in my opinion, is Last Shot, which I mentioned earlier. Last Shot very much stays grounded in the real, it's funny to call Star Wars real, but the real things that we know about Star Wars. Whereas as this book goes in the complete opposite direction and tries to undo everything that we know about Star Wars. Yeah. But it doesn't take the time to actually do it. And that really at the core, that's the revelation I had. And I'm kind of glad that I did read this book because I had that revelation. Like for the longest time, I didn't really fully understand why I didn't like the book other than, hey, this thing took me 8 months to read. And that is obviously a clear sign that this book is not for me and is not okay. The fact that I came to this realization this time that this is the least interesting story you could have told. And you do the least interesting things you could have done with it the whole time. That's the big problem. If a prequel to Ronin came out where you're telling the story that I mentioned earlier about the war and about the planet being stolen and you stay in the aftermath of that, event, or maybe that event is like the first part of a trilogy, then you've got something you can build off of. Yeah. But that's the biggest thing. And that's why I think I would go the opposite direction of you. I would never suggest this book to somebody who's trying to get into Star Wars, because I think if they like it, they're going to be completely unsatisfied with Star Wars going forward. And if they don't like it, they're not going to give Star Wars a chance.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't recommend it for like a first read. Like read Lost Stars, read what else do I usually recommend? I can't even remember.
Read Inferno Squad.
That's a good one. That's also good.
So good.
There's a lot of really good first read options. I wouldn't recommend it for like a first read, but like if someone were to ask me like, what do you like? Should I read this book? Like I usually don't say no because like it's Star Wars, and like I feel like people need to try things. There are acceptances, but I think with books, I would rather let someone try something for themselves rather than just listen to someone on the internet and not read it, or read it like, don't not read a book because someone on the internet said it was bad. Like, I am very
Yeah,
against
that's
that.
valid.
I'm very against that because I'm like, you don't know what they're coming to that book with and why they didn't like it. Um, but I can't imagine. So the reason they could even market a book like this was because they had visions.
Hmm.
They did this book because they could say this is a novel based on a Visions short. There's no other way you can market this book outside of that as a Star Wars book. Because how do you even do that?
Yeah.
How do you say, like, here's like a Star Wars book that's not actually the Star Wars that you know? There would have been no other way to market something like this unless you said, oh, Visions, this thing that's coming out that everyone's really excited about. Here's a book about one of those. And and like it didn't work. It just didn't work. And I mean, there are probably people out there who really like this book, and like, I'm so happy for you. I don't dislike it. I definitely don't have as strong of feelings about it as you do, but
I was gonna say, to be clear, I do very much dislike this book.
but the reason we are here talking about it is to honestly acknowledge that, like, sometimes there's Star Wars books you're not going to like, because I think the most important thing that Star Wars publishing can do is continuing to try different things,
Hmm.
knowing that sometimes, and this is like the complete opposite of all the Star Wars on the screen that's happening right now, you have to try things knowing that it may not work for everyone. But if Star Wars books if you keep getting the same variations of the same Star Wars book over and over again, it's not interesting. And so that's how you get books like this that may not work
Yeah.
for a lot of people, but at least you tried something. At least we can say Star Wars publishing is not afraid to try things.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And like, yes, I vehemently dislike this book, but I don't spend a lot of time and energy
Mm-hmm.
on it, you know? Um, and I like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I won't go on my why I dislike the Acolyte rant. If people are interested in why I think that's a failure, I would point them to our Best in Butts episode reviewing the series.
Mm.
But that legitimately hurt me.
Mm.
It legitimately hurt my Star Wars fandom for a little while. In a way that I know, things like The Last Jedi did for some people, or The Rise of Skywalker did for some people. That was the first time that I hated a Star Wars and it took something out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this book, I very much, like you said, just kind of I close it and go, God, I hate that book. And
Yeah.
originally I said never going to read that again. And then somebody suggested, hey, you could podcast about it. And I was like, oh, I love podcasting. And then here we are. But like, this is where I really want them taking those risks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they took a huge risk with the High Republic and it landed tremendously.
Yeah.
And they were able to make a TV show that was in that time period. And sure, that TV show failed, but in my opinion, but the fact that they were able to do that is a
Mm-hmm.
testament to the success of the books,
Yeah.
right? And that's where I want them taking the risks, is where it
Mm-hmm.
is low. Because guess what? Nothing is lost on the Ronin being a failure. There's a lot lost on the Acolyte failing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm not trying to bash the Acolyte. I've already done enough of that. I'm good forever. God, people are gonna think I'm like the most negative person in the world when really, like, I'm the one that's always like, let's like all the things over on our show. But there is an aspect that's really important to analyze
Mm.
when you don't like things, right? And
Yes.
why you don't like them, and the extent to which you don't like them. And there's I hope people have seen this in our conversation. There's an objective way to look at it.
Yep.
I legitimately don't like this book, and I'm having zero emotions about it right now. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
literally just talking about it almost as an out of body experience, objectively looking at what this book doesn't do and why it doesn't do it and the effects of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is an important aspect that we have to continue to have as we get more things that we don't like.
Mm.
Because the more Star Wars continues on, the more things are going to happen that we don't like.
Yeah.
There's been other books after Ronin that I didn't like. And you know what? Again, I'm still okay with it. I am honestly still okay with Ronin existing.
Mm.
You're never getting me to reread it a third time. I will literally die before that happens.
Is that a challenge?
It is. Look, there are certain fights you don't want to pick. Okay. Know your weight class. Know your weight class. But like, I have no problem with this existing. I honestly don't tell him this, but I like that Drew likes this. I'm really happy for him that he likes this. Because it means that there continues to be hope out there that they're going to continue to take risks and keep pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's why I cling to the Daniel Jose Older thing so much. That's why I'm glad there's a Mace Windu book coming out.
Mm-hmm.
If you've listened to me on Clashing Sabers, I lovingly hate Mace Windu. So freaking excited for the Glass Abyss. Like, so excited because they're taking this character and they're taking a risk with it and fleshing out this character that doesn't have a lot of dimension to him in this new book. It might fail tremendously. It might be the greatest Star Wars book ever written, but it's important that it's written. And it was important that Ronin was written to try to find out, is this something that we can do? Are people going to cling to a book that says Star Wars that isn't Star Wars? The answer was no.
Yeah.
But at least you know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's important. I think it's important to know that, for example, going back to what you talked about with Heir to the Jedi earlier, hey, a first-person Star Wars book ain't going to work. iJedi might have worked okay back in the day, but in this new pantheon where there's so many different types of Star Wars coming out, we can't do that. Okay, cool. I've read Heir to the Jedi 3 times trying to like it. Right? Like,
yeah.
It's fine. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And that's what I would encourage people to understand is like, yeah, we're talking about a book that both of us don't like. And also it's not that big of a deal.
Yes.
You know?
So here's how to know. Here's how to tell. And the only way to tell if I don't like a Star Wars book, I will acknowledge that it's coming out. I will do all the promotion for it. I might talk to the author. I will do episodes on the podcast about it. Once that promotion cycle is done, I will never talk about that book again because I don't like spending energy talking about things that just aren't for me. I think, especially in Star Wars, which for me is something that provides so much joy and is so important in me staying hopeful and continuing on, I don't want my Star Wars time to be filled with, I don't like this book or I don't like this story or I don't think, like, that is not why I'm here. And so if there is, like, it doesn't happen very often because I like consuming a lot of different stories and I like to try to give things a chance and things like that. But if there's legitimately something I do not like, you'll never hear me talk about it again after we're done acknowledging the fact that it comes out. Because if there's one thing I really, really care about, it's authors getting the recognition they deserve for doing a Star Wars book because it's really, really cool that they get to do that. If I don't like it, I just won't talk about it anymore. Because I think what I wish more people in the fandom would realize, and I know why they don't, and it's this whole thing, and it's never going to change. You and I, for example, we can acknowledge that we don't like something, but we're not being negative about it for the sake of being negative or, stirring up things. We're just talking about things that we don't like compared to things that we do like. I think if more people were able to say, hey, this wasn't for me, but you might like it. Why don't you give it a try? Or, hey, let's have an honest conversation about why we didn't like this, but still acknowledge that it's cool that it exists in Star Wars. The fandom would be a much more fun place to be because I do my podcast and I love Star Wars, but like I don't really engage with the fandom a lot anymore because it just is exhausting, and especially online, especially with all the algorithms pointing toward all the negativity.
Yeah.
And all of that. So like I think what more people need to hear and really, really listen to as we're talking about this is, hey, if you don't like something that's in Star Wars, it doesn't mean that all Star Wars is bad. It doesn't mean that you're not a Star Wars fan. It just means that there's a story you maybe didn't connect with or didn't really just enjoy that much. And there's still so much other Star Wars you can enjoy instead of that. And you can not enjoy something and just not really talk about it. And that's fine. Let the people who enjoyed it talk about it all they want to. And if you don't want to be part of that conversation, you don't have to be. You don't have to. Like sometimes you don't have to talk. You
Well,
really, yeah.
I love that, and I worry that what people are going to hear you saying is, if you don't like a Star Wars, just be quiet.
Yeah, it's
And if you don't have anything positive to say, your opinion should just be kept to yourself. And I want to make very clear, and
yeah,
that is not what Meg is saying here,
yeah,
because I think the whole point of this show is that, and I can say that because the whole point of Clashing Sabers is that we
yeah,
don't pull punches. I know you
yeah,
don't pull punches on, and we haven't in this episode on something that isn't good.
yeah,
But the core of it is, why are you still punching it if it's down already?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
there's no reason to do that. It's not helpful to you. It's not helpful to anybody else. I do think if you don't like something, you should say something,
Yeah.
because if you don't, they're going to take, silence is an answer in itself.
Mhm.
And so, like for example, God, Drew and Devore don't like Ahsoka nearly as much as I do. That is a very big understatement, and probably partially my fault, since I made them talk about Ahsoka for like 3 straight months on the podcast. I'll own that. But like, yeah, we still talk about it, and it comes up regularly,
Mhm.
and we don't hide that they dislike that, and
Yeah.
that I love it. Like, that's not what Meg is saying. I want to be very clear about that. Like, because I know I think a lot of people hear that if
Yeah.
you don't like something, just don't
Right.
talk about it.
Right.
And you said those words, but I don't think that I know that rather that that's not what you meant. It was, enjoy what you enjoy,
Yes.
embrace what you enjoy, and let go of the need to continually make your point about something that you dislike.
Yes.
Right? Like,
Yes.
I see it with the Acolyte. Like, people are still bashing on the Acolyte. Guys, the Acolyte's not coming back.
Yeah.
You made your point. Let me pause here. I'm speaking specifically to the people who handled it in a respectful way, who had legitimate reasons for disliking it.
Mhm.
Okay. There's a whole other party out there. We're not going to bring up their name. That is a whole different situation. But talking to those people who legitimately, like myself, didn't like the show for story reasons and didn't want a season 2 for story reasons, we made our point.
Yeah.
And the show is not coming back. They heard our voices. They reacted appropriately. I hold out hope that they were actually reacting to our voices and not the voices of the other side. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, like, other than bringing up the Acolyte to make a point about something else and about, what we're talking about. There's no reason to continue talking about the Acolyte. It's done. I don't have to rewatch it. That's the miraculous thing. It's still on Disney Plus. Doesn't mean I have to click on it. That's the beautiful thing. And so, like, I think your point is really, really important. And it's something that gets convoluted in this whole, well, we need to be positive, or we need to get rid of the negativity. It's not that. We need
No,
to
it's
be
not.
real about things. And that's what part of the reason I agreed to do this is because, like, you and I don't know each other super well, but from knowing you more through Devore and the kind of people that Devore puts himself around, I knew, like, all right, this is somebody that I can trust to be real and honest, that is not going to pull punches, that is not going to come on here and try to convince me to like something that I don't like, because being positive about everything is the most important thing. And this kind of stuff, these kind of conversations are really important in doing that. And that's why I think a show like yours is really important. That's why we continue to do what we do at Clashing Sabers, because it's not about going out there and saying, hey, everything is all hunky dory. And I've left many of Star Wars shows, left listening to them because they went either I hate everything or I love everything. It's like, guys, there's nuance here. Like, learn it, please. I know we're not great at it. I know that, a lot of us are sheltered from reality, but come on, let's practice nuance here. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, and like and thank you for, like, clarifying that, because what it really boils down to for me is, of course you're allowed to not like things. Of course you're allowed to talk about the fact that you didn't like something. But in doing that, in being able to acknowledge, because we should be able to also acknowledge there are things we don't like. I think the piling on when someone says they don't like something is just it's an internet thing that's just weird and I don't love it. If you don't like something, of course, you don't like it. You can say you don't like it. You can talk about why you don't like it. But in doing that, also remember that there are things you do like. I think that's really what I was getting at. Is
Oh yeah,
in
absolutely.
yeah, in hating Ronin, you also love Inferno Squad and probably a bunch of other books. Like we're talking about
Most of the
Ronin.
other books,
Yes,
yeah.
we're talking about Ronin, a book you really don't like. But we're not here saying like, oh, because you don't like this book, this is all you're going to talk about forever and you don't like any other books. It's just so hard, I think, for a lot of people to acknowledge. I don't like a thing.
And I think
It's hard.
it is hard, and I think people could do a better job, myself included, of using what they don't like to really be grateful for what they do like.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you've been, I'm assuming you've been to Galaxy's Edge, right?
I have not.
No, okay.
No,
Well, when I make this Clashing Sabers meetup happen, you're gonna have to come, and we're going to
no,
Galaxy's Edge.
fine.
I know, twist your arm, right? But like, I went in to Rise of the Resistance with this is the greatest ride of all time. It's life changing. All of those things that people have been saying about it, and I won't say anything that happened. I won't say why I think this. I thought it was mid.
Mm.
It was fine, but it wasn't what everybody built it up to be. Now, Smuggler's Run, that one changed the game for me. I would have sat all day in that one, right?
Yeah.
And I actually like Smuggler's Run more because of being let down by Rise of the Resistance.
Mm.
I actually enjoyed everything else more because it was like, all right, like this is what people set as the bar was this. And I like a lot of other stuff more than I like this. So my bar must be really high. Right. And so I'm staring at the lightsaber that I made that is one of the top 10 experiences of my life. And I'm thinking, would I have loved the lightsaber as much if I wasn't let down by Rise of the Resistance, which was the first thing we did when we went to Galaxy's Edge? Would I appreciate other Star Wars books that have come after it? Something like The High Republic that took the risks that it did. Something like Resistance Reborn that brought in all of these different characters that we had in the past and brought them into one story, which is a huge risk.
Yeah.
Would I like all of these things? Would I like Jedi Battle Scars as much as I do, which is something that was built off of a pre-established property like Ronin was, if we didn't have Ronin? I don't know the answer to that. I legitimately don't, but I do think it's something that we need to think about and consider. That the things that we don't like can actually make our experiences better because everything is information and everything is communication and it's telling us something. And I think we need to do a better job as a fandom, myself included, very much so, to listening.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
That's it. It's really not complicated. It's not.
We just make it so.
We do. It's challenge. It's hard to go against what you feel other people are thinking. Like if you're seeing on your timeline, for example, everyone talking about how they love this book and you don't feel the same way, it's hard to like want to, decide if you're going to be honest and say how you feel or just go along with everyone else because it's the easier thing to do. And you have to ask yourself, like, what is the value of whatever decision you're going to make? I mean, at the end of the day, they're Star Wars books and there's a lot of life outside of that. But there's also a lot of enjoyment in these books at the same time. So it's a balance between, how you want to spend your time and energy. And the reason that we're here talking about this book and doing this episode and continuing this series is because I think it's so healthy to be able to say, this book was okay, or it wasn't, or I feel differently about it now, or I don't. But you, for example, reread this book and you further understand now why you struggled with it so much and where it fell short for you. And it didn't necessarily change the way you perceive it, but at least you know now. And at least you have that. And at least you can walk away with that and think, well, this book did this and I didn't love that. But think of all these other books that are doing all these amazing things and all the books that are coming that we don't even know about yet that might do even more amazing things. The value of rereading Star Wars books is it makes you ask the question, why do I feel this way? And does it matter? Is really all of this is.
Yeah. And like, I think of like a book like Test of Courage, which I think the last third of that book is possibly the best Star Wars book ever written, particularly with what it says about the Jedi and the Force. Yeah. I look at a book like that completely differently now that I realize why I dislike Ronin. You know, like the fact that I'm like, I don't like how it talks about the Force.
Yeah.
I don't like how it world builds. I look at something like the High Republic now, which did so much world building, and I go, God, I appreciate that so much more because of rereading this. So while I hate you for making me reread this, I also love you for making me reread this. You know, and again, going to that balance, got to have perspective and nuance to this conversation. Yeah, it was. The rereading of it was not a great experience, but getting to have this conversation has been, you know, it has genuinely, and I don't throw stuff around like this, but it has made it worth it because I think it has allowed for the two of us to gain some perspective and share our thoughts and hopefully anybody listening to gain perspective and not necessarily to go right now and reread something that you didn't like or rewatch a show that you didn't like or anything like that, but to in the future take this idea of it's important, but it's not the end of the world. And I struggle to say that because my other big fandom is I'm a big Florida State Seminoles football fan. And I hate when people tell me it's just a game because for me, it's not just a game. It means a lot. I put a lot of time and energy into it. So I'm not saying that it's just Star Wars because that's invalidating. But I will say, if you dislike something, it's just one Star Wars.
Yeah. One of many.
Okay. One of many.
One of many.
Right? Like, my team sucks this year. We lost our 5th game out of 6 yesterday. We got a game in 10 days. We might win that one, right? We might win that one. There's always that hope out there. That next Star Wars book that comes out might be the one. I've loved a ton of stuff since Ronin came out. You know, that's the thing to keep in perspective. Like, yes, this not liking this stuff matters, but how you react to it, I think, is the bigger aspect of things.
Exactly. Wow. See what we did here. This conversation was exactly what I knew and hoped and knew it would be, which is just talking honestly about a franchise and a series of books that we just really, really like and really want the best out of and really want to enjoy as much as we can. I don't know. I still don't know really how I convinced you to do this, but it happened. It was a team effort, really. It was a team effort.
Listen, I got cornered. I got virtually cornered at like 10 o'clock at night in like my second week of school. You don't know tired until you've been second week of school teacher tired. And DeVore's like, this is the convenient time to talk about this. Let's bring this up now. Nah, but it's been fun. And I think it's been definitely worth spending the time to talk about it. I don't know if it's been worth the almost year of my life I've probably committed to reading Ronin overall over the 2 readings. But you know what? That's okay because we're getting more High Republic coming out soon.
Yep.
Books like Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade still exist, which is the greatest book ever written.
Oh, it's really good.
Yeah. So, you know, Star Wars has both. It's got what I think is the worst book ever written and the best book ever written. So, you know, it's good. It's good stuff.
It's all a spectrum, really. It's fine.
Isn't it all?
Tell me, where people can find you on the internet. Tell me about Clashing Sabers. Tell me about anything you want me to know about before we close out here.
So, I mean, kind of like you've gotten the impression, Clashing Sabers is a podcast network. We have currently 4 shows running on the network. We have the main show. We have Sith Talk, which is kind of more of a free-flowing conversation. It gets into kind of the darker stuff that you and I have talked about, the grittier side of things sometimes. We've got Forever Star Wars, which is an amazingly high production show that Mark puts a lot of time and effort into. He's been releasing episodes of his first radio drama, which has been absolutely exciting. And then, of course, the Don't Burn the Sacred Text, which is our book podcast. So all of those you can get in one feed 100% for free. That is over on any of your podcatchers. Just search Clashing Sabers and you'll find that. Then, of course, we have our website, clashingsabers.net, which is also where you can nominate a teacher to get the books we talked about earlier. So we raise funds through our Patreon, which is patreon.com/clashing sabers. You get some awesome extra episodes from Amanda over there. She usually does a week by week when shows are coming out, which is not something that we do on the main feed. So you get that. And 100% of that money goes solely to buying and shipping books to kids across the country. Let me make that very, very clear. We're not paying for bookmarks. We're not paying for pencils that we toss in there. I toss action figures in there sometimes. We're not covering our hosting fees and then paying, for this stuff. 100%, every single tax deductible penny that you give to us, whether that is in our fundraisers that we do, which we'll have one coming out next year, or on our Patreon, goes only to that and will forever go only to that. I've made that promise. It's very important to me that we keep that promise because I'm a teacher myself and I know the impact that books can have on kids. We've been able to reach thousands of kids across a variety of communities. We've worked with special ed classrooms. We've worked in rural areas, urban areas, suburbs, every kind of population you can imagine. We've been able to send books to and have that impact. And that's been solely because of our patrons and the people who support us through that. And you get some great benefits because of it. So again, if you want to do that, all of that stuff is on clashingsabers.net. I'm sure you'll throw all of that in the show notes too. But biggest thing right now with the now $700 worth of books that I have sitting behind me right now that I get to go through and take all the price stickers off of, which is that's the Ronin of this experience, is sitting there taking all of those stickers off. But if you have a teacher that you want us to send books to, when you go over to clashingsabers.net, there's some bars at the top right-hand corner. Click on those, go to nominated teacher, provide us that information. It's called nominated teacher. You give us a teacher, we're getting them books. And we're not talking 5 books. We're talking hundreds of books going out. Like, these boxes are packed to the brim with Star Wars books. And so it's not a small endeavor. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of people to make it happen, but we can't make it happen without you guys nominating people. Whether that is a teacher, if you are a teacher yourself, you can absolutely nominate yourself. If you've got kids, be selfish, nominate their teacher. We have no problem with that. Pick up a Yellow Pages from, I don't know, wherever you find them now, the library, and just point and find a teacher. Drive to a school and try not to be creepy when you go into the office and ask them to give you a random teacher that you can send books to. However you need to make it happen. Like, let's make it happen. Let's help, spread the greatness of Star Wars books to kids of every age, whether that is pre-K, whether they have autism, whether they are high school seniors about to graduate, and anywhere in between. Let's help them out. And that's been a really cool thing that we've been able to do. And I would appreciate anybody jumping on board there.
Absolutely. I will link to all of that for sure. Kids reading. Kids just need to read Star Wars, anything. It's really great.
It has a huge impact. As somebody, like, part of the reason we started this nonprofit was I did a donor's choose one time to get Star Wars books into my room, and I saw the impact when that box came. Completely changed my classroom. And so the fact that we can do that same thing, and that we are, between the 8 of us, lucky enough that we don't have to worry about paying for our hosting fees or anything like that. Like, I'm not knocking anybody else who has to do that, but that's something we've been really lucky to be able to do. And we've been able, I always say it's not really us having the impact. It's our community having the impact. It's all you guys who are listening, fueling this thing.
Amazing. This has been great. I'll have to have you on again. Maybe I'll have you on for a book that you really, really, really like at some point. That could be also a fun conversation.
Oh yeah. You won't have to twist my arm to reread Inferno Squad or Rise of the Red Blade or something.
There you go. No, there's a lot of books we haven't talked about on here yet because the show's like 2 years old, so we got all backlog to get through. So we'll be in touch about that for sure.
For sure.
Thank you so much. Genuinely, because I know you didn't want to do it, but also you did, but also you didn't. We did.
It was very back and forth thing. Yeah, for sure.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.